Welcome back to the Village Council Work Session Meeting of September 9th, 2025. We will take up general business, two specific items. One will be a review of the grant applications for the CVB One-Time Project Fund. That's the Convention and Visitors Bureau of Moore County. And then we will discuss the Pinehurst Development Ordinance update. So let's get to the CVB. Doug?
Yep, so the one-time project fund is now on round 2, so maybe it should be second-time project fund, but we won't argue with them on this. So we met a couple of months ago and discussed 4 different projects. One was the Greenway connection on Airport Road to connect Southern Pines and Pinehurst and our Greenway systems. Another one was across the street from Village Hall here, that vacant space to change it into more of an extension of the Arboretum with some walking trails, etc. Then one was to make updates to the Fair Barn, and talking with staff, the things that are most needed there are lighting issues. Currently, you can't dim the lights, it's either all or nothing, and then the big skylights make it impossible to make that room darker, which makes it very difficult for holding conferences and doing presentations and things like that. And then also the bridal suite could use a little touching up as well. And then the other project that we discussed was doing something at the actual harness track. So I went back, I wrote grant applications for each of these. By the way, they're due Friday. And so I feel like the Fair Barn one is pretty straightforward, and I feel like it meets the intent of what the CVB grant is for. I think the Greenway connection is also straightforward, and is one of the items that the CVB specifically said that they'd be willing to fund. Across the street, the Arboretum, I think is a nice project. Potentially give visitors something to do while they're here, you know, instead of, if you don't have a tea time till the afternoon, and you can walk around and do something nice. I don't know if it necessarily generates a whole lot of new visitors to the area. And then the last one, the harness track, this is kind of why I want to bring it to you. I think I might have gone a little overboard. But the Ferris
Roll these up, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, if you want to scroll to it. My intent was that during the summer months, there's no horses there, and the area is pretty much underutilized, very much underutilized. And so the idea was to put some minor attractions, I wouldn't say attractions, but amenities that would help the area be more exciting, more meaningful for residents. So some walking trails, dog park, upgrade the parking area, kind of put a outdoor lounge area with seats or whatever, just to make it more of an asset, where right now it's not used very much, and kind of only the people that use it are the neighborhood around Monticello or Doral Woods. We can make it a little bit more available to the rest of the public. I think that could be a great option. But the project cost is a lot of money, and I didn't want to, submit this and we get the grant, and then all of a sudden there's a match of $500,000 that the council may not be willing to provide.
Oh, could it scroll down so we can look at the 4 of them, if we can get them on one page?
Yeah, is there one? Okay, so this is brief summaries of all of them.
Okay. I guess a couple of questions in general. There's no limit, theoretically, to how many we can submit, right?
No.
And we're in competition with every other municipality that's going to be submitting some.
Yes.
And if we accept I think you're probably wise point at this moment that the Magnolia Meadow, which I never knew that was the name of it, so I think
it's not. I made it
up.
up.
Well,
so, yeah.
well, let's informally adopt that for now, the Magnolia Meadow. We'll put it to a vote. So that leaves us with 3, and my instincts are, because the Airport Road, the walking path connection seems to be so, what I want to call it, so much of a consensus among our neighboring towns, us. It makes, and there's the carbon reduction funding part of the aspect. So it makes very good sense. And when you compare the harness track to the Fair Barn, I would put the Fair Barn as number 2 on my list. I think it's a reasonable amount of money, and I think it may well help generate more usage for the Fair Barn. And then we can revisit these other 2 next year if we wanted to. Or we could throw them all out there. What I don't want to do is have us have a whole bunch of out there, and then they sort of pick and choose, and whereas we get a chance to prioritize a couple. That's my general thoughts. Open to other comments.
Yeah, I thought the Fair Barn was kind of a slam dunk, because I think it meets the criteria of bringing people from the outside.
Yes.
CVB theoretically is looking for. And the improvements can be used for a variety of things. So I kind of like that one a lot. A question on the airport walking path is, does that, from the CVB standpoint, does that get muddled with what we're doing through the SMPO?
So my perspective is I think they'd like to be a part of a bigger project, and so they get a lot of bang for their buck only putting in $100,000, and it's going to be a $500,000 project that they're going to get some credit for.
Magnolia Meadow did not particularly resonate with me because I thought it would be largely used. I questioned the 4,000 people, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
I like the harness track improvements. I was surprised to see it in there. I liked it. I would add on actually something, which is, because I saw one of these this past summer, additional sports competitions. There was a time where there was it looked actually like rugby. It did not look like soccer. It was a competition. There were multiple teams. There had to be 200 or 300 people there on a May or June Saturday. You don't need a lot of equipment. You don't need to redesign a field. You don't need striping and necessarily what have you. And the only question I had with all of these was, we've got a line item in there for marketing. It's $25,000 or who is going to do that? Is that something we think we can do internally, or?
Yeah, so we have a marketing budget for Parks and Rec. Like when we put out our, I think we do it twice a year, like the program manual with everything. So that's part of that. So we do have money there, and we will include any of these as part of that program brochure that we send out to people. But we'll also do other forms of advertising as well.
I mean, it's a separate conversation regarding the harness track, whether council wants to allocate $500,000. That's
Right.
just, but in terms of I guess we'd have to come to that decision before we throw the application in case it got elected, but those would be my thoughts.
I have Fair Barn number 1, harness track number 2. Comments, what you said before, I concur with.
I agree with John. I love the harness track concept. One thing about the harness track is it is a national historic landmark. And that kind of puts it in a different category from the standpoint of attracting people. Now, Fair Barn is too. The Fair Barn is a little more manageable from a village standpoint, budget-wise. But the harness track, we've always looked at how can we really do something with the harness track, and I think this is a great plan. We don't have to do it all in 1 year. So it would be my number 1 choice.
Oh, I mean, I liked it. That's why I put it forward. But, and Jack, you can correct me, but I'm pretty sure the half-mile track is a contributing factor to the historic landmark status, and the mile is not.
That's my understanding also.
Yeah. So I was thinking probably more of these would be on the mile side of it, but ultimately we can decide where we want some of these to go that might be appropriate even in a national
Right,
historic landmark.
the mile track, if you will, is more undeveloped,
Yes.
if you can use that term that way, and has more potential for enhanced usage versus the complex of the harness track itself.
Barb, I didn't understand totally. Is harness track your number one?
Yes,
Okay. What's your number two?
probably the Fair Barn.
I don't, well,
This leaves jacket, and have you identified which ones you want?
By the way, I also agree with Pat. I'm not sure we ought to throw 4 up there.
I guess my question on the harness track is if we throw it out there, are we actually willing to fund the
Well-
$500,000-ish?
We're sitting on an excessive amount of cash, okay? And so I don't have any problem from a budgetary standpoint. We're at predicted over the next 5 years in the forecast to every year have a minimum of 41% in our fund balance, and our policy says 30%. So, and that's before we get more revenue in from increased property valuations and other things. So I don't think it's a real budget issue for us as a village, and I'm fine with it from that standpoint.
I think it's a reasonable expenditure. It's good stewardship still.
Yeah.
You're providing to the community for the overall quality of life for the residents. So I have no problem with that.
Jack, you have thoughts?
I like the Fair Barn enhancements. I think that makes a lot of sense. The harness track improvements, I can see easily some features that could be added to the mile track area that would be a substantial value to the community. I'm not sure that I want to spend $685,000 of the village's money in that respect. I don't know if it needs that much. So if it were just taking the $685,000, to me, it seems like as it is described, it's too big a project. I would actually opt for the walking path, Airport Road. But I do like doing things in the harness track area, or at least the 1 mile track area. I think that could be done, but as a part of, for $1,185,000, I have a little bit of problems with that big an expenditure. So I would go with, if I had to choose two, I would choose the Fair Barn and the connectivity along Airport Road.
I didn't mention a lot on the connectivity in the airport road, and while I certainly think it's a good project and needs to continue on, from a CVD perspective, to bring in more tourists, I can't think of a single time I went on a vacation to a location because they had good walking paths, except maybe Paris. And that's not quite regular walking paths. So I'm not sure how much of an attraction that's going to be to them. Fair Barn, you can argue that. Harness track, you can definitely argue that.
Well, it depends on the harness track improvements. I mean, a lot of the description, I took it as enhancements that the village residents would use, that it wouldn't necessarily attract visitors. That's the way I read it. Maybe I read it wrong.
Well, you got a lot of people that come in for both the horses. That brings a lot of people from out of town, and then the word gets out from there too.
Well, it depends also on an event that's held.
Yep.
Depending on the nature of the event, the star of the show, you'll get people from beyond our village corporate limits to come here. Just sort of like the Pinehurst Barbecue Festival, there's people from all over the southeast. So
The other thing to keep in mind is that this is not the last bite at the apple. Presumably, this increase in the room tax just next year, and so some of these things could be, maybe the harness track, we're kind of jamming it in at the end. We haven't thought it through quite as well as we could. We could do that next year. I think we seem to have consensus on the Fair Barn.
Yeah, to that point, I was going to mention that if we wanted to hold off on the harness track for an actual application, but move forward with a preliminary design so that next year when it is there, we know exactly, the dog park's going to go in this corner and parking's going to go over here and the trails will connect all these places.
Yeah, I think I'd need to see more details to know what's going to happen out there. I mean, is it going to be a Ferris wheel? I mean, is it going to be a kiddie park? I mean, is it going to be a dog park? How big a dog park? Which dog?
Barrel wheel.
I'd like to know a little more.
The Ferrell wheel?
all right, so the Fair Barn enhancements we're definitely going to move forward with as an application. And I gather we're going to and we're dropping Magnolia Meadow. Oh, it's a beautiful sounding name. It rolls right off your tongue, Magnolia Meadow. And now we have the harness track, include or not include. I'm fine including it, and I'm fine not including it. I think it's I think it's a legitimate tourist-related activity of enhancing the track itself and hoping to attract other things there in the off-season in particular. But I'll defer to council members. Anybody else? We know we're going with the Fair Barn. We know we're not going with Magnolia Meadow.
I support you on this and exactly what you said. I think it's exactly accurate. So, somebody write that down.
Someone write that down.
I think I'd do the Fair Barn and the walking paths under the theory that we may only get one anyway. And the walking paths are moving along a separate path,
And then Doug mentioned doing a little more research and due diligence on what we would actually want to see in the harness track.
absolutely.
Okay, is that fine?
So submit applications for Fairborn and the airport path, and do more conceptual work on the harness track. So next year when this application comes up, we are in a good place to move forward and have a shovel-ready project.
Okay.
Or the Parks and Rec Department starts to think it through and says, you know, we could really do some enhancements out there. Maybe put it in the plan.
So, but more thought on the harness track and submit those other two.
Yeah, more details.
And if we can talk about this more later, but if Magnolia Meadow is a concept that you guys like, we can see what we could do in-house or with.
Yeah, it's not that much of a dollar figure, and
Maybe we can even pare it down and do it for a little less.
and also show a concept, and we can.
Yep. Okay.
Fine. Okay, so we've got a decision there, and you're sending forward the applications by Friday. That's the. Okay. When do they expect to make awards? Is it before the year's out, calendar year, or is it?
I forget exactly what the last time they did it, I think they announced it late December or early January. So
Okay, so it's pretty
I think
close.
that's when we could expect it.
Okay. All righty. That closes out that discussion. Now we go to the discussion on key points of the Pinehurst Development Ordinance update. So let's bring this on.
Yeah, so we have as you know, there's the focus group that is working on this project. There's been a couple of items that have come before the focus group that, maybe the consultants and the focus group are leaning one way, but there's some concern that might not be what the council will ultimately want. So what I want to do is have those decisions discussed today rather than at the final step of the project and it comes before council and you're like, actually, we don't really like that and we want to change it. So we'd much rather have that feedback early on in the discussion so we can plan for it and not have to redo things at the end. I do have a little bit of an update, what we're looking at for the next little bit. Next week will be, the final focus group meeting. They're going to be meeting in the morning, and then that afternoon and evening there will be the community meeting. We will be updating our PDO website page. The day of the meeting, we'll put the PowerPoint on there after we've had a chance to run it past the focus group, make sure everything looks good on that. That way, if someone's not able to attend, they can at least get the information off our website. Shortly after the meeting, we will have what we'll call the final draft of the PDO on the village website for people to review. That way you'll have well over a month to review it before the public hearing that will be late in October for village council. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make one statement. I was an early champion of us having this completed by October. I no longer feel married to that. I don't think that it's an arbitrary date. if it gets completed in November, December, or January, that's fine with me also. I think it's more important we get this right than we meet a date.
Uh,
So that's.
I think
just
everyone
wanted-
would agree with that as well. I don't think this is an impossible date. Certainly it is, I think Jack said aggressive. I would agree with that, that we're getting a lot done in the next month and a half in order to meet that deadline, but I don't think it's impossible. So the few things I want to make sure that we get direction on from the council as a whole are approvals and review of responsibilities, whether or not we do conditional zoning in our farm-based code districts, and the inclusion of a planned residential development. Do we want to include that in the PDO zoning text? There's probably going to be other things that come up between now and the end of the project. I think these are probably the biggest ones, so hopefully if with your direction today, we'll be in a good place to move these forward. I don't think I mentioned this on the last slide, but we're coming before council on the 23rd for an overall update on the PDO and all the different chapters. So if there are any issues that have arisen before then, we can discuss and get clarification on at that meeting as well. So as a reminder, there are 3 different reviews and approvals that are part of zoning regulations. One is administrative, that's based strictly on whether or not they meet all the boxes and we can check them all off. Then there's quasi-judicial. These are ones that require evidence and sworn testimony, and they're based purely on the facts, on the evidence presented. And then there's legislative decisions like rezonings, ordinance amendments that are solely the responsibility of village council. So what we are recommending is that for major subdivisions and major site plans, those are both administrative approvals, and for special use permits, which are quasi-judicial approvals, that they be moved from village council approval to planning and zoning for those administrative decisions, and for board of adjustments for quasi-judicial decisions. And what we've heard is that if we did this, there would be concern that people aren't able to come and express their concerns about a project. And that's kind of a double-edged sword. So if you get a whole group of people coming into a village council meeting for an administrative approval, and they're either all for or against, but based on the administrative approval process, you have to approve it because they've checked all the boxes, it kind of puts you in an awkward position. So what we're recommending is, as part of the PDO update, that we change to require a community meeting that the applicant will have to do before they even finalize their complete application to the village. That will give them and residents an opportunity to meet, discuss what might be concerns, and have those addressed by the applicant before it even comes to the village. Also, it will still have our public hearings that would be required in front of P&Z for the major subdivision and major site plans. And it will also have the quasi-judicial notifications that go out for anyone affected by any of the special use permits that would come before any of the boards, before the BOA. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, if I could add some context too, if you'd back up one slide, right there to the 3 decision types. What may be missing is the understanding of the public notice and public involvement with each one of these decisions, and these are statutory. These aren't, special privilege that we have within the Pinehurst Development Ordinance that we give ourselves. So administrative, as the name implies, is typically handled by the administrative staff. Again, as Doug mentioned, if the boxes are checked, it's approved. They're rooted on objective standards, objective criteria. Is a setback met? Is an impervious surface required met? Is the use an allowed use within said district or not? Is the property within said district, or does it lie within another district? Administrative decisions do not require a public hearing, so they do not require a public notice of said decision. Public involvement cannot be taken into account in making said decision. Whether that be made by whoever the delegated authority is in the local jurisdiction, the public input has no basis on what that final decision would be. Quasi-judicial, also for administrative, there is, because it's based on objective standards, so that's that whatever standard is adopted is the discretion, right? That's it. That's very limited. There's absolutely no discretion that can be made by anybody in making that decision. For quasi-judicial decisions, again, this is all dictated by state statute. A public hearing must be held. You all are aware of that. You've witnessed them. You've administered those hearings before. It's a very special type hearing, however. It does require a public hearing notice where only the affected property owner and/or applicant, if they're different, and adjacent property owners are mailed notice. That's the extent of the public notice, and public input on those hearings and those decision types is very limited, and it's limited only to competent, relevant testimony on the factual evidence based on the case at hand and the subjective standards that apply to that case. There is some discretion in whoever that decision maker is. It cannot be the administrative staff. It can either be an appointed board or the governing board, but that discretion is very limited to that case that's been presented and those subjective standards. So anyone's opinion, any member from the public, anyone who is not given legal standing to present arguments for or against a certain case can be taken into account by that decision maker. Legislative decisions also, by statute, require a public hearing. That public hearing notice is given to the applicant and owner of this property if they're different, all adjacent property owners, as well as a notice of the public hearing to be ran in the local paper of circulation within 2 consecutive weeks within a 10 and 25-day window of that scheduled hearing. So that intent is to solicit broad public opinion, where only the governing board, after having a recommendation from the local planning board, has unlimited almost discretion as long as nothing is considered that would be unconstitutional or without or out of the grant of power given by the General Assembly. So full discretion in making those type of legislative decisions. So again, I think it is important to note the level of public input that is required, solicited, and can be considered in making those 3 decision types, along with what discretion can be used in those 3 decision types.
So again, the recommendation by the, well, I don't think actually our focus group made a recommendation on this, but the Kimberly Horn's recommendation was to make these major subdivisions and major site plans and those administrative decisions done by the planning and zoning board, and the quasi-judicial ones, the special use permits, to be done by the BOA. I don't think we want to take away any discretion from the council, but these ones have, especially the administrative one, no real discretion. So that's why we're making that recommendation. And quasi-judicial ones, the BOA only handles quasi-judicial decisions, so they're aptly prepared to make those decisions and work in that time, in that kind of frame of mind. So,
Alex, one of the things or Doug, you included into the packet was types of decisions for development regulations in North Carolina from the UNC School of Government. And from what I'm seeing, this pretty much follows what the recommendations are from the UNC School of Government. Is there anything I'm missing from there, or is there anything that's not necessarily following their recommendations?
Yeah, the School of Government won't necessarily, in many cases, come out and say, you know, we recommend do this. It's usually, it's permissible if you do X, Y, or Z. A lot of times what they'll do, they will send community surveys out or surveys to local jurisdictions and see, you know, how many of you guys are practicing this authority given to you by the general statute. But yeah, it is much more commonplace since 2014 when things moved from conditional use permits and conditional use zoning, which was a quasi-judicial, very convoluted, complicated development review process that had to be handled by the governing board because they were looked at as zoning amendments. That since that time, most communities have really gone away from the governing board acting on mostly any quasi-judicial hearings, especially as it relates to like special use permits, which is what our current framework has for village council to consider. So I wouldn't say it's an outright recommendation, but it's definitely an industry trend for.
That's what I
over
was going to
10
go
years.
into. So in terms we use in industry, you have industry standards. You have medical standards on there, or gold standards that are on there. Analogous to that, I guess, is a government type of thing in small municipalities of North Carolina. Is this the usual standard that's done?
It's the most common. I wouldn't say it's the only way things can be done, but it is
Okay.
the most common.
All right, thank you.
Alex, first of all, thank you for clarifying for the three different types of decisions. That, I found that very useful. And I will say, I think twice in my time on the council, you have come and made presentations before us. And at the conclusion of your presentation, you have basically said, this project meets all of the standards, and you really have no basis on which to not approve it. In fact, you can't not approve it because it's met all the standards. I didn't like having to say, I'm sure there's a reason why we had to go through that. It doesn't make it a lot of fun. My question goes back maybe a half step before Jeff's. My understanding of the purpose of the PDO upright, this whole project, was to take our PDO, which was adopted in last, I think, in '08, but has been successively amended, and clean it up, make it more user-friendly for staff, for professional applicants and residents. And then maybe also introduce in the way that it is produced some graphics, so it's not just a bunch of words, there's some graphics about setbacks and what have you. And I thought that was a very useful addition. And I wish I understood this at the level of depth that, say, Jack might, or I don't. My concern, which could be wrong, is that simultaneous with accomplishing those first two things, we are also making some fairly significant changes in the structure, which we haven't really talked about. And that's not to say that I'm against them, it's just I was surprised to see that. And my concern, which again could be wrong, is that have always found it to be a bad idea to be in the business of granting free options to other people. And if we go through with the proposal here, am I going to 6 months or a year from now have something come before me that looks like the option was given to someone else? So were these staff recommendations for these changes? Were these Kimley Horn recommendations? Could be both, I don't know.
Absolutely, and the scope of this, as it's been called since 2020, I believe, as an initiative action plan,
Yeah.
has been comprehensive update. And changes to process and procedures were one of the key items that were issued in the RFQ and were actually discussed in the 4 interviews that this council had with our consultants. I know I've had some of these presentations before, again, as you mentioned, with Planning and Zoning Board, Board of Adjustment, HPC, Village Council, probably most recently with your, John and Barb's onboarding. I know you remember everything that went through that day when you had, your time with various key leaders of the staff. One of those things that we talked about was always recommending, and it was actually right on the heels of a special use permit hearing that council had just held, if you recall, maybe a month or 2 ahead of that, of the election at that time, 2 years ago. 2 years ago? Wow. That it really puts it, a governing board rarely, I think Doug may have sent you guys some information on how many of these administrative decisions and how many of these quasi-judicial decisions or evidentiary hearings that
I
the
think he
council
said
has
4
held.
in the last 6 years. Was
Yeah.
that that number?
That sounds about right. Yeah, I can check.
And I think that's for each of those 2 different types of decisions. There have been about 4 each, where there's been a host of the other type of development decisions, the legislative, which are the conditional zoning, which are the, general concept plans, yada, yada, yada. So, I mean, this has been a goal internally, I know, for quite some time. This didn't just come about through this particular chapter of the draft PDO that we looked at. And again, this is a recommendation that we think is rooted in real foundational government policy that, what you're doing when you're making those decisions, you're not making a policy decision. The policy is set by adopting that standard. So that standard is what you have to look at, is what safeguards any type of decisions being made that would be outside of what you would deem to be that character, right, that we want to uphold. Density, types of uses, that meat and potato, nuts and bolts of zoning ordinances and regulations. The quasi-judicial is just a weird little nuance, and it's almost oddly weird just specific to the state of North Carolina. And that's anytime you have a subjective standard. There's going to be some of those that are required, the variances, appeals of staff decisions.
All
If
the
you're
HPC decisions.
HPC
Quasi-judicial
decisions are
hearings
a
and-
perfect example. They have to be. We have no leniency, no wiggle room to consider anything other. The special use permits they're rare and they're really not fun, quite honestly. I'm surprised at maybe how many local communities, even to us, still have a governing board issue those. A lot of times they're maybe like an architectural type review where, it's in the eye of the beholder, if you will, how harmonious some sort of development proposal would be. So just back to the point, yeah, I mean, that had been contemplated. There's been a draft RFQ that had been started by, 2 or 3 staff members prior, and this has been contemplated. And we also used to issue special use permits based on site plans. So there used to be this parallel entitlement process that would run with what seemed to be an administrative or legislative decision that also had a quasi-judicial component too. There's a minor special use and a major special use. So after 2014, we started making those changes, moving away from that, as that started to be the way the statutes in the General Assembly was starting to dictate things happen. That's when conditional zoning was first introduced instead of conditional use zoning. After the updates with the consolidation of the general statutes into Chapter 160D, which were adopted 2019, local communities had to 2021 to come compliant with. That was completely removed, that authority completely removed, because it was a very awkward process. There were 2 different decisions that had to be made, but were also related. So a lot of this is because we have not updated our ordinance, I'll say holistically, since 2014, but our framework that we are operating on is circa 2005, I believe, or our sort of general construction, if you will, chapter to chapter.
John, you mentioned you're put in an awkward place because you have to approve because of the boxes are checked or whatever. I think I can see why maybe special use permits, you might have a concern about that because there is some discretion. But administrative ones, I don't see why the council at all would want to have those decisions come before you, because you're going to have a room of angry people and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, let me respond to that. That's what we're elected for and paid for. There's only 5 elected officials out of a population of 18,000. And I've sat in this room with lots of people arguing on lots of things, both as a council member, and I've sat in the audience when I attend P&Z meetings and HPC meetings from time to time. And I think our residents expect us to be participants, or at least first-hand observers as these things are being made. Right now we have residents who are upset about some of the actions that are coming out of Raleigh. Whether it's Raleigh wants to prevent us from downzoning, they want to prevent us, they want to take away the ETJ. And so residents are being pulled at as to be left more excluded than included. So I'm reluctant to do that. I mean, I realize I've sat in meetings. I remember one had to do with a person on McDonald who was complaining about the a dwelling unit that was going to be added into the house next to her. Someone might have known her. I didn't know who she was, and there was nothing we could do about it. We were told that, and she came up and made her point. I sympathized with her because I thought she made a nice case. She was a single mom, and sure enough, we said there's nothing we can do. So we proceeded to approve it.
Yeah.
And then 5 months later, she sold her house and she left the community.
Yeah.
So,
I totally agree with you that I think the public does have that expectation of you, but I also think they also have the expectation that you can actually make a choice
Something
on
about
it,
it.
and which is a false choice. You don't really have
no,
that.
it is a false choice, but nevertheless, they'd rather see us, I think, tell them, we can't do this because of the way the rules are, rather than us, and say it in a public meeting, where they can come here and speak before us and make a public comment, than sort of just being told, listen, we have nothing we can really do here, so we're not going to even have a discussion here. And that worries me.
When people have asked me how I like being on the council, I always say that the one thing I don't like are the things that we're required statutorily to do. They're perfunctory. The votes are always 5-0. There's never any debate. And it's like, I have extraordinary confidence and trust in staff. We have terrific staff here. I would happily offload a lot of those things and not have to spend time here doing that, so that we can focus on the things where input and debate really have impact. Oh, we can't do that. That's not the way the rules are. And I guess that's my only level of discomfort, which could be due to not fully understanding this, is that if there is an area where we can make a difference, that we preserve that, because I think the public expects us to. If it truly is in one of these, say, administrative decisions, then I think then what that says is the public doesn't really understand the architecture that we all are working under. And they may not be happy to understand that. They may be very upset if they were educated on that, but there's not anything we can do about that.
Especially if they're invited to attend the hearing before you guys, to come and make their voices be known, even though there's little or nothing that can be
They
done
stand up and
about
say,
it.
we hate this, and 50 people say
Why
that.
did you mail this to
And then
me?
you come and say, well, there's nothing you can do about that. This meets all the standards and it's going to go forward.
So we are fortunate that we have 2 members of our council who are on the focus group and have been involved with this.
Actually, there's a majority of the focus group in attendance tonight. There's 2 others in the
There are
audience,
hands
yeah.
raised, hands are being raised. I think I see that, okay. But I'm going to ask you all to please give us some of your thoughts, because you've been living this.
We have. First of all, I don't agree that we should not participate in these decisions. When this was introduced to the focus group at our meeting, it was introduced as a trend that was being adopted by municipalities across the state, and in order to modernize decision-making. And I checked with my friend, ChatGPT, who tells me that there are 502 municipalities in the state of North Carolina. And that includes places like Charlotte and all of its satellite municipalities and everybody else. And in order to follow a trend, one would think that it would be something that would be of benefit. And as I look at Pinehurst, we are very unique in this state. And there are several things that differentiate us, one of which is the fact that we are pretty much at capacity around growth. And secondly, we are one of only 2 national historic landmarks in the entire state. And those 2 things tell us, as our residents constantly tell us, how to focus decisions that we make. And our focus should be on measured, intelligent growth and preserving our history and our character. And that's what our residents expect. To blindly implement something because it's a trend makes no sense to me. What we are doing, it looks like to me in this particular case, is removing a level of scrutiny along with a level of decision making. And in doing so, we are going completely contrary to what we should be focusing on. I think it is dangerous to take away another opportunity for public input, which is what we're doing here as well. And part of the justification is that it streamlines the approval process. Well, we don't want to streamline the approval process. We want to make it accurate and focus on the things that are important to us. Streamlining an approval process shortens it. And that's not what we're here to do. And I don't think that's what our residents want us to do. We talk about the neighborhood requirement for a meeting to be implemented by the developers. So that's how we're going to compensate for our loss of voice by removing a level of scrutiny. And so, and by the way, these things exist now. Very conscientious developers implement these neighborhood meetings. But to say that the residents aren't losing a voice is not fair, because the voice that they are, the people they are reporting to in these neighborhoods meetings are developers, and developers are not elected to represent the interests of our residents. We are, and we therefore need to be a part of the process. In terms of quasi-judicial hearing, I'm not sure I understand why special use permits are the only ones that because there are two other ones, variance and certificate of appropriateness. Not sure why that has been singled out.
Those two are specifically, can only be made by that one decision body that is required by statute.
Governing board.
So first of all, everyone on this council has some experience with quasi-judicial hearings, whether it's observing them, which many of us do, whether it's presiding over them. We do have experience. Some of us have actually attended courses by UNCSOG on quasi-judicial hearings. In addition to that, somebody just mentioned we've had 4 quasi-judicial hearings to come to the council in the last 6 years. So, I mean, it's not like we are really gaining any ground by removing us from special use permits in decision making. And interestingly, and this will be my last comment, and I'll let Jack go.
Keep going.
Today I received an timely email. It says, quote, following a roughly 5-hour evidentiary hearing that lasted into the early hours of Tuesday morning, the Tarboro Town Council voted to reject a special use permit for a data center and energy storage project on more than 50 acres on the south side of Anaconda Road between McNair Road and Western Boulevard. That was a special use permit, evidentiary hearing that was heard by the Town Council of Tarboro. So apparently they haven't modernized either, but I think the point is, when they do come to council, they're critical, and we should have impact on that. In terms of major subdivisions and major site plans, you know, part of our responsibility is long-term planning. And many of these, and we've seen them, are years in the making, long-term projects themselves. We should be a part of that process from beginning to end. So I rest my case.
Jack?
I can't be anywhere near as articulate as Barb is. basically, I really can't support this change in roles and responsibilities, to be honest with you. I really do not believe that this is one of the objectives of the PDO rewrite. In fact, I was very surprised to see it come along here a month and a half, 2 months away from supposedly approval date. A proposal that dramatically changes the roles and responsibilities of the various boards, commissions, and council members. I was really surprised, to tell you the truth. Pat, to go to your comment, I mean, every 2 years at a minimum, the overriding concern is development. We got too much development, the development's not being done right, et cetera, why don't you guys take care of, and are you gonna control development? If we pretend that we are going to give the responsibility for approving certain types of developments to another board and walk away from it, I think that's the wrong thing to do. It may seem like rather an extraneous step for us to hold a public hearing after the Planning and Zoning Board has held a public hearing on something that, if in fact they meet all the requirements, we should approve or we must approve. There are some values in that, and I think I recall chaired the Planning and Zoning Board approval of the Pinewell Phase 5 site plan. And in fact, there was some comments about this is just theater and you guys have to approve it regardless. And so why do we even have this public hearing? First of all, the place was packed. There was a lot of public interest in the proposal. They wanted to see the site plan. They wanted to be able to be heard about the site plan. And in fact, when it came to council, it was equally well attended. But I tried to point out right in the beginning of that meeting, and you remember this, Alex, that this isn't, you may consider this theater, but there's a lot of good reasons for this. There's a lot of good reasons we have multiple public hearings in our development process, and I don't think we're particularly unique in asking for that. Number one, it gives the developer, or we have another X number of eyes, either the Planning and Zoning Board or the council, to take a look at it, and it's unlikely, but we may discover something that may be a problem relative to our PDO. That's unlikely, but it could happen. Secondly, and most importantly, it gives the village citizens an opportunity to see the site plan in detail. What's going to happen in their neighborhood? What's going to happen in their backyard? And it happens not only at a public hearing at the Planning and Zoning Board, but it also lets them express their concerns to their elected representatives. And I believe that they were elected, I'm not elected, but all you were elected to in fact represent the community in the face of development. And thirdly, actually, from time to time, doesn't happen quite often, but it happens occasionally, is that the opinions expressed by the community in one form or another actually are incorporated into the development. From time to time, you see a developer saying, well, no, you're right. Maybe the landscaping isn't that robust in this area, and maybe the lights are going to shine into your house from the parking lot, and maybe we can do something about that. And in fact, we've seen it from time to time. It doesn't happen all the time, but the developer can, by hearing all the various opinions from the community, they can make minor modifications to their plans. It happens, and it's worth the extra effort, in my opinion. So I do not support these changes in the roles and responsibilities. As far as whether it's the thing that's the most common thing lately, just as a very random, looking at the Southern Pines PDO, they don't do that. Council has a responsibility. Aberdeen, they don't allow the P&Z to make those kind of changes. Their council makes that decision. Cornelius, who we happen to reference quite often, their process as their council making these approvals. So it's not like it's universally accepted. The only thing that I've seen, which is in fact the table from Greer, South Carolina, which is almost a cut and paste that we were given from the consultant, this is the table from Greer, South Carolina, and this was essentially laid on us as this is the coming thing. You should do this. I don't find that acceptable. So I do not support these proposals in this form.
But it seems like the will of council is certainly leaning towards keeping the current approval structure in place, but just, is that true?
I think so. I mean, I feel that way, particularly.
This question bleeds over to the second item you have on your agenda, which is the conditional zoning versus by right, because it's almost exactly the same consideration, to tell you the truth. Although there's a little bit more involved in this because it's only on the form-based districts. So
Sure.
it's slightly different. It's narrower and yet it's the same issue in a way.
Yeah, so this first one, you want to keep it the same structure as it currently is
I
and
think so.
not go with this change to administrative and quasi-judicial changes. Okay. All right, we will move on to the next one.
Good.
So conditional zoning within small area plans. This is a small area plan for Village Place. I know it's a little hard to read. We can pull up the GIS if we want to and zoom in and out a little bit. So Village Place, so all of these right now, when development comes forward, it's conditional zoning. And as you're aware, conditional zoning requires people to come up with a plan and come before the council for approval. The reason why these were initially put in as conditional zoning is partially because at the time we're up against a moratorium. We needed these small area plans passed, and so one way to ensure that council could have control over these potential projects is to have it conditionally zoned. Now that we have design standards in place, the focus group recommended that some of these can be by right, and actually I think that in Village Place they recommended all of them be by right, and then in Village Place South most of them be conditional zone except for one of the already built out areas. So Alex, I think I kind of flubbed over that. Anything you want to add to that,
Just one
idea?
question for Alex. When we talk about Village Place, much of Village Place is by right of the village.
The core block, absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah, so,
yes.
yeah, right. So, and honestly, that's one of the reasons why I feel comfortable with this block area. So, this is McGaskill and this is Magnolia. So this whole area, we control the majority of that property. So anything that happens, we're going to be a part of anyway.
There's really two quote-unquote largely vacant areas in the Village Place form-based district, and I say largely because both of them have some site infrastructure that has been installed, although over a period of time. One being the Tradition site, which is just across that core area, right? And then the Phase 2 of the Greens of the Arboretum project, Block H and I. Now that the property next to it has changed hands or changed zoning, right?
That's
kind of
Moore
taken out
County.
of the equation, right? So that was the other, vacant property. The rest of it in Village Place is already developed, so anything would be a quote-unquote redevelopment that would have to apply or comply with the newly adopted Village Place form-based district design standards, which would be the dimensional criteria, the open space. There's some added connectivity, parking's always in the rear, some architectural standards. The overlay is not shown on here, but the lion's share of the property within the Village Place form-based district is also located within the historic district, so there's an added level of exterior form that would be reviewed.
Yeah, so as part of the development update, the PDO update, there are these design standards that are going to be added into it, and the purpose is to meet the intent of the form-based codes when they were adopted in the small area plans.
This was an attempt to lift, to the extent practical, the objective standards in the form-based guidance plans into this portion of the PDO, whereas in 2023, when we were, again, as Doug said, kind of backs against the wall to get something implemented quickly, we only adopted some dimensional criteria, which I believe this council is familiar with trying to apply through the Trotter Hills residential development, which, resulted in a list of conditions, a page and a half long to go with the general concept plan, because everything had to be varied based on whatever the dimensional criteria was that we adopted. So there's additional standards on top of the dimensional criteria that we currently have from 23 now.
And just a few of the standards that are within the criteria are roofs have to be so-and-so, utilities have to be screened or behind, stormwater has to follow best practices, whether it's rain gardens, permeable paving, et cetera. You need to be pedestrian oriented, so right on the street, no blank walls, needs to be public access with parking in the back and an appropriate amount of open space. So in short, what we're saying is that we feel between these design standards, the historic district, and this already being mostly built out environment, that a permitted by right would be appropriate rather than requiring everyone to have a conditional zoning. So if that's not the case, we can.
I'll let Jack, I mean, he knows this much better than I. My skepticism is I always like to ask the question, why change? What is happening now that tells me, boy, we got to change this? Now, I'm a big believer from my years in the government of, if I can streamline something, I want to go streamline it. But when the need for transparency in our village among our residents for what changes they see happening, which sometimes they don't like, sometimes they shrug their shoulders, sometimes they're in favor. But the need for transparency, I think, is more enhanced by the conditional zoning remaining rather than going to by right. One of the, going back to our community survey, which now that it's every 2 years, I really drilled down on 2024, is something that I've mentioned before. It's about the overall satisfaction with the Village of Pinehurst services by major category. There are 13 major categories listed, and the residents opined. There are 13. The number 12 was as you're going down. Number 1 is fire services. They very satisfied. Number 12 was the level of public involvement in local decisions. And what I see here is we're shrinking a little of that public involvement. And primarily because we sort of represent the public, whether we like it or not. And the only thing that was, number 13 was enforcement of village codes and ordinances. But the more I talk to people, they seem to be more content with what's been happening, particularly in the last year in that front. I think that may have to do with the success of short-term rental issue. But so I'm as much as I like to streamline something if I can grab it, I just don't see the need here to do that. And I'd be curious, Jack, one of the questions I was going to ask, but you answered it before I could even ask it, was what does Southern Pines and Aberdeen do? You answered it on the earlier item. Okay, do you know about what they do on by right or conditional, or does Alex or anybody else know?
I mean, it's so site-specific that.
Very
we,
site-specific.
This is so unique, and I will tell you, it was my idea and my recommendation because of the speed at which I was given the mission to get this accomplished, to recommend the conditional zoning approach, and it was not that it matters, but it was never intended to be how this is going to move in perpetuity. That was never the case. That was never the exercise.
But you
That
did
was
the right
my
thing.
idea in 2023 to get a over 2-year moratorium lifted and get some sort of plan. I mean, and I say that because that, we know that those two plans were dissected, patched back together, destroyed again, stood back over and over and over, which is the real reason why you can't implement the plan, is because it's just been chewed through, it's unrecognizable, and you can't implement the language that are in either of those two plans. So we invoked the conditional zoning per my wonderful recommendation in 2023. We've gotten a little bit of experience with that process and taking the form-based guidance plan and putting it into action with an application. And what we learned from that is that we're kind of arbitrary in what we decide we want to look at, and we like this visual and we like this on this plan. And conditional zoning is meant to, when the development standards that you have adopted don't make sense for a site-specific situation. Whatever that site-specific situation is. You have water towers, you have a public services facility, you have this private property owner that's vacant, you have this existing adaptive reuse that's in the middle. You know, you kind of need to come together and get all the entities there and have a quote-unquote master plan. That makes sense, right? That's what conditional zoning's for, where you need to condition your way away from some development standards or add additional development standards that cannot otherwise be considered or applied in an application. To try to pseudo-implement a long-term planning document on a case-by-case basis, that's not the intent. Sure, it's allowable. In Village Place, it just didn't make sense. Pinehurst South, I know we haven't got to there yet, but you're talking about, other than portions of our ETJ, the largest, most, assimilation of vacant raw land in our jurisdiction. And Doug, if you didn't, just because, since I just went right on, especially the area on the east side of Highway 5, south of Blake Boulevard, all that together is going to require some master plan, right? That's going to that needs a lot of considerations outside of any type of major site plan type review or approval. So we recommend everything within Pinehurst South have the conditional zoning approval, except for, again, the core area, which is the old Pinehurst South overlay, mainly, again, because of its already built environment. Anything that happens there would be, sort of redevelopment and meet those standards. So again, it's just a little bit of context I think that's missing. I know I've communicated it to you guys before, but while we're having a discussion in the public session, that was the intent for that conditional zoning approach. We haven't really been able to really apply anything in Village Place just yet. It's a little more understood what we will expect to have and what we desire to have in the Village Place area. We've had, Jack, how many now? 3 plans? Village Place, New Core, whatever you want to call it. They all say the same thing. Pretty much what we adopted was we abolished our VMU district and almost readopted it again. Is really what we did with the Village Place. We didn't really do anything catastrophically unfamiliar than what we haven't planned for since, sometime in the 90s when we first started planning in that area. Pinehurst South, as we know, is just, it's a different beast and a different animal.
Sticking with Village Place, Alex, can you educate me on what is the intersection between by right development and the HPC standards for that portion that is in the historic district?
They're both required in order to obtain some level of development approval. The HPC, or COA, is a sort of a prerequisite of final development approval. So that would have to be obtained before an ultimate development permit would be issued for any development in the historic district.
So if I was planning to do something there, I would get my COA first, even though I thought I had drawn up something where the nuts and bolts, so to speak, leave aside the exterior facade, was by right. I still have to get my COA from HPC first.
What is by right, and thank you for mentioning this, because it's not that development is by right, meaning you develop the property by right. You can if you meet all the requirements, like we discussed in 3 different decision types in the first part of our class. It's the use. is by right. It's not that the development, it's that the use is by right. That
Gotcha.
you want to have an animal groomer business, well, that use is allowed by right, not that it's only allowed if it's conditionally zoned into that use table. The special use permit is the same thing. It's a special class of establishing a use. It's not that ground can be turned and the building can go vertical.
I'm thinking of the one experience we have where a developer came with a plan, substantial public input in opposition. Developer went back and came back with another plan that they felt was all by right, if you will.
Correct.
It's recently.
Right.
That was an excellent example of public input
And conditional zoning,
impacting
yep.
the applicant. I think it impacted the planning and zoning board. Yeah, I sat through a couple of those meetings, and they were good meetings. I mean, the planning and zoning board were asking really good questions, but the applicant was pushing the envelope on setbacks, parking, height, all those things. And in the end, the neighbors, I think they felt good that they had their input, and two, they were acceptable of the outcome when it went to HPC. They realized that's the way the rules work.
So I think we're all going to like that proposal as a great example because that's a perfect example of what conditional zoning should be.
Yeah.
They tried it. They tried to condition because they didn't want to meet certain development criteria based on whatever the pitch was for each one of those conditions. Ultimately, the writing was on the wall that it was not well received for whatever point. So another route.
I think the combination of Barb and Jack's comments on the previous topic, the concern, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and say, how could you let what's going on Morganton Road go? Wait a minute. The real answer is that's in Southern Pines. That was not our decision to make. And so I think maybe what is below the surface here is making sure that we can appropriately control the growth that we want to see happen in Village Place or in Pinehurst South. But I agree with you. Pinehurst South is the largest area where someone could come with a proposal.
And too many things have to align. I mean, transportation, number one, in that area. So it's very prudent to have a developed master plan for that area. And I say the term master plan, just you need to see what that proposal is going to be before you're comfortable with allowing that to move forward.
I think we're kind of spinning our wheels a little bit here too. The way I'm seeing this is that we want to make sure we have full transparency, which I totally agree with. I want absolute transparency and to make sure we have the input from our citizenry. The question of whether to bring that back or not, well, our real input is putting in the ordinances beforehand and making sure the ordinances are logical, because if they meet everything, we got to approve it. Now, I can't tell you how many times we've sat in here before and listened to presentations, and it was like, hey, if everything is met, you gotta approve it. If not, then their next option is to take it to the Superior Court and litigate. And if they win, then we pay the bill. And so we're relying on our staff in that regard. But I certainly hear what you're saying. Not want to change the process, and I totally agree with the transparency aspect. Has that changed at all since 10 minutes ago we had the conversation? We look at conditional zoning.
I would say this is slightly different than the previous discussion. And the reason it's slightly different is because if we talk about Village Place, we're talking about an area that for 30 years at least we've been talking about how in the heck can we get this place developed and developed correctly. And there's been small area plans, there's been new core plans, there's you name it plans. And in fact, as a result of our comprehensive plan, we spent a lot of money and had a consultant put together small area plans, if you recall. And these small area plans, there was a lot of community input, and it was very popular to hit the button or put put the sticker in the right place and so forth and so on. But the point is that in the end, the community bought into and the council approved the small area plan, which demonstrated a vision as to what these places would look like. And the vision wasn't described in terms of dimensional requirements or use tables or anything like that. It was very much a visual type of thing as to what the streetscape would be, what type of activity would be there, what retail establishments, where there might be a hotel, and so forth and so on. So there was a lot of community interest in the way it turned out, and there's a lot of community interest in how it will turn out. And the reason I say that is because when we put together block by block, use by use, you know, it was excruciatingly difficult to go through every single use and every single block and to put down whether it should be permitted or not be permitted. And we felt that with staff guidance, that conditional zoning would give us some flexibility in demonstrating to the public when in fact we got a proposal, what it would actually turn out to be. And that was the best way to go about it. I mean, I would love it if in fact there was a way in our ordinance, in our PDO, to put down every single factor and have it described completely in a manner that we didn't have to be involved and we could come forward and just approve it as a matter of form. But I doubt that's going to happen, to tell you the truth. And we've had so much limited experience in using our conditional zoning and our form-based. We've only had one in Pinehurst South, as you mentioned before, one in one in Pinehurst South, which in fact I believe the conditional zoning process worked quite well because the developer wanted some variations in dimensional requirements and so forth. And I think through it was a little painful at times, but through the process we actually got to the point where we're going to have a very good product. So I thought that was a success of conditional zoning and a good example of why conditional zoning we ought to put in place. And in particular, going back to Village Place, I think the area, we really have no idea how it's going to be exactly developed. We don't know whether that block structure and use structure is going to be maintained. And in fact, if you look at the blocks, they sort of cross over parcels. I'd like to think that they all exactly correspond to parcel boundaries, but I'm not sure that's the case in every case. So the use tables and blocks and so forth, it gets very confusing very quickly. The best way to actually see what's going to happen is to have someone bring forward something through the conditional zoning process, show us the dimensional requirements they're looking for, the uses they're looking for in this particular block, and the variations they may need. And that is that's how conditional zoning can work, and I think it can work successfully. So I'm very reluctant to change the process.
That's kind of what I'm getting to, like the priest. I appreciate the opining, and not just on the conditional zoning, but your background with that. Ultimately, we were being asked to give guidance as what we need to do on 3 different topics. We've hit 1, conditional zoning is number 2. And what I'm seeing here is probably that there's a will of the council not to change what we're doing right now for conditional zoning.
I don't
think
see
that-
nothing is broke, let me put it that way.
Okay.
And our experiences to date haven't been enough to give us an example of what's broke or how it works or how it doesn't work or what other things we could put in the PDO to actually make it work better.
I will recommend, and we will make a change in the form-based district to right ahead of the use table then where change of use, where there is no quote-unquote development being considered, does not require conditional zoning, because that is outrageous to even consider.
What's an example of that?
Building form, the structure, nothing is changing. Let's say Hughes Plumbing wants to move out and another
Plumber.
some plumbing supply or whatever company comes back in, does not require conditional use. If anything is not, remodeled to the extent of 50%, that's kind of that's the
Wouldn't
industry
apply necessarily anyway, would it?
If you read the use table.
Use table, because the use changes?
Yes. Which is why we looked at the built environment as sort of that
Yeah.
justification for making that.
Right, so if the gym that's on the corner of McGaskill and Rattlesnake turned into an office. You're saying they shouldn't have to go to CZ, and that makes sense.
If
If
it's
it
one
wasn't in
permitted
the
use
use table
substituting for another
appropriately.
permitted use.
I'm sorry, go ahead. If the gym wanted to change to something else, and it's one of those blocks, and the use table does not allow the use they'd like to go to, is that where you're going?
Only if it's a use that is allowed within that block, right?
Otherwise, it would have to be a conditional zoning application.
Or,
and
well, actually, they would have to petition to amend the table. You can't
Right.
condition a use.
That's right. It would have to condition.
The change from one permitted use to another permitted use would not require that. I don't think I have a problem with that.
That's no different from any zoning district where you,
Precisely. That's the basis of the whole topic, yes.
Yeah. And I think we all know where this is going, but I just want to point out one thing that I thought Alex said was important, is that the development is not by right, the use is. So like, if it's a bank, I think we would be fine with a bank in almost all those districts.
However,
What's your however?
it has to conform to everything we say it must conform to.
Right,
So
right.
it's not by right yet. The use is allowed by right.
But anyway, I think.
we've got
direction on this, yeah.
Decision on this, okay.
I don't think it's quite broken yet. There might be an example where it's broke, but I don't see it just yet.
Well, I think the argument basically boils down to that we want to make sure we have transparency for this, and it's worth the additional effort coming to council to let it go. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, we're putting a little bit of effort on the staff. I mean, let's be honest too, but,
It makes it difficult for us because if we're not adopting real development standards, which is part of the staff review, which is what we give you a recommendation on, right? Our staff recommendation that we give to you, whether it be, if heaven forbid you ask us to give you a recommendation on a quasi-judicial decision, which I don't think is staff's purview, because you have to hold the hearing. I've always said, everyone in the staff will tell you, I've said nothing matters on a quasi-judicial decision until that hearing has been had, evidence has been submitted, accepted, and closed,
but with
right?
conditional zoning, and this is the one experience we've had in Pinehurst South. I mean, staff brought forward the variations required in the dimensional table and a couple other items. I think it had to do with alleyways and size of alleyways and size of streets and so
Setbacks,
forth.
encroachments,
So,
impervious.
encroachments, yeah, you name it. But so staff did their work. It would have been a conditional zoning and or something like that regardless because of the
Based on
variations.
that particular application, but if someone comes in and conforms to everything we've said, there's not really a condition to.
Well,
So
that's-
it does put,
Yeah, but I think
we're not
Alex-
gonna understand how to do a real detailed staff review because, again, it's gonna invoke that form-based guidance plan with that vision, and we can't say, it looks like it resembles this cartoon on page 68. So we're not gonna really be able to give you a real, we're just basically gonna say, here's the application, the applicant's gonna come and present their case.
But you're really getting to the crux of the problem is, can we in fact codify all the things we want in the small area plan? And I don't think it's possible right now. I think it takes hearings and reviews and people to look at it in order to understand whether it's actually going to meet the requirements of the small area plan or it adheres to the vision, let me put it that way.
And Alex, I would guess when someone brings a plan, whether deliberately or just innately, you're kind of thinking, does it conform to something we have? You're going through that process anyway, I think.
Just gonna be looking at numbers, the rest of it's just gonna be,
And you're trying to identify, well, this doesn't or this doesn't, and you have that initial discussion with whoever's making the proposal.
And I think that the review process you're describing, what's being proposed is that it goes to a different level versus at us. Okay, it's still going to be going through the wickets of the due process on there. Understand that, and I'll push back a little bit from Barb's comment. I do want to see more efficient government, okay? And I do support that. I don't want to take away transparency. I don't want to take away input that's on there. I go back to we're here to give guidance on this, and this guidance that we're giving right now is not for this council. This council dissolves in 2.5 months. Then the next council's there, then the council after that. So 5 councils down the road, 6 councils down the road, they're the ones who are going to live with this. And so if the idea is take the additional effort, council does that, okay. let's move forward.
And other councils are not bound by previous council decisions, so they
It
can.
just takes a lot to change it, obviously.
Right.
I mean, other than our budget, this is probably the most important, if not, this is probably arguing the budget there, but let's just say the budget and the ordinances we have for what you can do with your property
Right.
are the two most important things we have going on as a big project, other than, obviously,
What-
we do fire and we do police, but these are massive, massive things.
Which is why transparency in the eyes of our residents is so important.
I won't disagree with that. And I also agree with you, let's get it right. So whether it passes in October, whether it passes in November, whether it passes in December, let's get it right.
Okay, we're set there. Doug, what's the next item?
Last one. So planned residential
But
development.
hold on, Doug. What's the resolution here?
Oh, we're sticking as is.
Sticking as is.
We're going to stick with what we have today?
Yeah.
Conditional.
Okay,
I mean,
to make sure we're clear on that.
Okay.
all right, planned residential development, kind of talked about this. I think everyone has a general idea of what it means. The question is, do we want to include it as an option in this current text? It would not be assigned to any parcels, but do we want to provide it as an option for someone to request in the future? I think it makes sense. We all know that there's someone that's going to be interested in doing this. I think if we do it now, it provides a framework that everyone's looking at all together in one comprehensive document, all at one time. I don't want to make it look like it's a one-off, that either it's a favor to someone or not a favor to someone, but I think doing it together makes sense.
Can I jump on this one here?
Sure.
For one, we haven't seen any proposal on the PRD,
Yep.
the details. I mean, if they wanted to pick up what we had in 2013 before we changed it and put it in this one here, I don't think that would be a very happy campers. We wouldn't see a lot of buyers for that. And the PRDs that I've seen in various municipalities seem to be very oriented towards a particular objective. Well, that's satisfying a particular parcel owner or they want certain types of development. And that's what we may want to go. The trouble is I haven't seen a thing just yet, and we're only 7 weeks away from supposedly the approval process. Got a long way to go between those. And not only that, is that this PRD, Planned Residential Development, will be very, very important to a lot of members of the community. And I think that they may want to have a pretty serious look at it. Now, we are going to have 2 hearings for sure, Planning and Zoning and Council, before it's approved. But I'm just a little concerned that it may be too quick to pop onto the community. I love the fact that we could get it done, but I just haven't seen anything yet.
Sure.
I think that, one, I don't see that it's actually necessary at this point, partially because of what Jack said. I think mostly what Jack said, but I do think that adopting it now, when we don't have any request at all, actually makes it look not neutral. It makes it look, in my mind, that, well, we know who's coming down the pike, so we're going to do this now, and we'll live with it then. I'd rather wait until we get a product and then get involved. That's
And I get what
the
you're saying.
neutrality issue is that cuts both ways.
Sure. I guess this is going to need to happen. They will be coming soon. So if we can do it in the big process, or we're going to wait until November 1st and then do it. I mean, it's
Well,
gonna
I
be
mean,
soon.
I'll be happy to have it done now, but I've seen nothing. This is a new zoning district,
Sure.
and a very important zoning district for our future.
And I think that's the reason why you may want to hold off on it. Although I will say, Kimley Horn has a draft. I don't think staff is necessarily happy with it, and I think they would want to work it a little bit.
I
Or maybe I
don't know
shouldn't have
that
said
that's accurate. I think they've provided us with 3, and sorry, we haven't discussed it. They've given us 3 examples that they've used, but, you know, we had first had this conversation back in the spring with
Yeah.
members of council about including or not including. We talked about it at a focus group. But here it's September.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we've struggled with knowing, Doug and I have, that is, what is the will of the council on considering this topic with this project. maybe now that we're in the, where we are in the stage, but I think while we were having this discussion today in this work session of these quote-unquote key topics, we wanted that feedback from the collective five.
I think if we council knew what the community, their direction, let me put it that way, because they have some say in this, it's gonna affect
Yeah.
communities. If we had some general direction from the community, and yet it's impossible to have any general direction from the community because we don't have any specifics to,
Yeah,
share.
I didn't think about that. The community could read this wrong of us putting this in now. They could interpret this as a signal that, hey,
A done deal.
yeah, council's on board. And obviously, we're not on board because there's nothing to get on board yet. There's no train at the station. But, yeah, I tend to,
I agree.
cross that bridge when we get to it.
I agree with the goal that if we were to adopt it, it should be neutral and forward-looking. But since we don't know what we're looking at now, it's difficult to say what it is that we are even approving now. And I would not like to have someone wanting to, before we've really had a chance to think about it, have someone come and want to try and use it, if you will. Because it got approved 60 days from now or whenever the approval ultimately comes.
Yeah. Alex or Doug, what's the experience with some of our neighboring towns with PRDs?
They're called different things, or a lot of them are just called PUDs is sort of the term, Plan Unit Development, right? They're, I feel like a broken record. They're used extensively. It's an industry standard allowance where it operates almost like conditional zoning. It's a legislative process where you create a site-specific plan, its own little designation. This is its little world it lives in. This is what you reviewed and approved. And what the local governing board would look at were density, uses, open space, landscaping, all the same stuff. It's very much like how we treat a conditional zoning. It's just that, you set a cap on the number of units or number of square footage if it's non-residential, and they kind of work that into the site however they see fit and as approved.
Some of it's the open space preservation and cohesive neighborhoods. To me, it conjures up, at least in part, conservation neighborhoods, which we took out of the comp plan, at least with respect to the ETJ.
Focus
We
area.
didn't really address it inside the limits, so I guess.
But I think that would be an extreme version of it. I think this is like, yeah, we want walking trails through here, and that works. But
There's some definitions that we need to have, like, I'll use an example, open space. If we're going to specify within the PRD X% of open space, or this is the credit you get for open space, or something, any referencing open space, we gotta have a pretty good definition of what open space means. Because I think we have some things to think about relative to the definition of open space.
Is it buildable open space, not buildable open space, whatever?
Yeah.
so, Alex, sorry to put you on the spot on this, but all right, say we don't include a PRD option in this rewrite. We know someone's interested. What are their steps to request that to happen?
Kind of put the onus on them to come forward with a text amendment that would be reviewed concurrently with some sort of development plan.
Okay.
Their text amendment could in fact be a PRD zoning.
Well, it would have to be that, or not have to, but that's most likely.
Which is kind of like a double legislative but related application process, right?
So do we, I guess my next question is like, do we want them to be providing that text amendment, or do we want to be the authors of that text amendment?
Well, we can certainly look at their input. I mean, I'm sure they've given thought to it, but I don't think, it's not apparent that they've sort of taken the necessary steps to get to the point where they can pull the trigger and go forward, because the residents haven't opined and.
I don't know what it would incorporate. The only thing I've heard kind of on the side is that it's too bad we took the PRD out of our previous Does that mean they'll be happy with the one we had before? I don't think so.
I wouldn't be either.
So,
Well, I think that's also part of the
Visions that aren't
discussion to put it back into this one. But if there's concern that we're jumping too much and going too far, then maybe to put that on the agenda as something else needs to be added onto this in 6 months from now. So it gives you a chance to define open space, okay? Or whatever you're doing. But it sounds like it's a topic that needs to be included, because if you say somebody else comes forward for planned residential development, it'd be nice to give them a little guidance. It makes their job a whole lot easier if we do that.
Kimberly Horn has enough experience in this, maybe they can find a way to, I'll say, leave an empty space on the agenda where it can be inserted later when we have an idea what it really is.
From what Doug just said, they've already done a draft.
Yeah, I
And
think-
so are they going a little farther than do an empty space?
Provide
So,
examples, yeah.
Yeah,
Some examples they've used in other communities as a conversation starter is what's been supplied to staff, but I have not expended any staff time on reviewing any of those because it didn't seem to be worth the time.
Right.
and what I'm hearing now from the council is effectively you don't want to put the PRD in this one. But I would highly encourage the next council that's coming on board to consider that as something to amend and put that into the system, because I think it'll make our staff's job a little easier on the planning side.
sure. I think it's something we can visit when the time is ripe. So, okay.
is that it'll have a lot of open-ended ability, I'll put it that way, relative to size, dimensions, open spaces, that will be decided at the time of application. Is that kind of a fair way? It'll be,
It depends on what the local community wants when it comes to plan developments, but typically that is the intent, is that there is more flexibility in the actual site design. You set the use, you set the overall density, other development patterns, and then kind of let the artist do the work, right?
that would work fine. It's just a matter of, I don't know if we have the time to get it in there.
Alex, just if you recall, what was the PRD like we used to have? Was it outdated, but when time came around, or was it?
It was very specific.
Very specific.
It had to be a private gated community zoned R30 and at least XYZ contiguous acres, right?
Okay.
That's how it starts, right? So Pine Wild and CCNC,
Okay.
right? Here's what you can do. And East Lake at CCNC was developed under that rule. And after it was approved and infrastructure installed, and then by the time building permits started to be issued, we weren't very sophisticated at that time as a village government, so it was just, and administering rules and regulations too. So this plan was adopted, which essentially operates as a PUD, as its own zoning district, but then the PDO has different design standards for that R30 zoning, and they don't work, and they conflict, and I'm sure Carlton's probably has his finger in his ears back there if he's still awake, but there were other design criteria that were allowed to have happen relative to road design, narrower streets, and smaller lot sizes for certain things that didn't meet, and so low water pressure, so there are issues with homes having to be equipped with fire sprinkler systems in order to meet fire. So it just administration of how that was handled, there's a lot to be improved upon. But here we are, we're dealt with a built environment that we're applying two different standards and trying to make them work as
We're a
reasonably
lot
as
more
we can.
mature
Yeah.
a village at this point. Okay.
All right, I think we have our direction.
You got your
on it.
answer.
Yeah.
Is there anything?
We can pull it off, great, but I'm not sure we can pull it off, that's all.
Doug, is there another item? Are we completed on this topic?
We are done.
Okay, then that ends our general business.
I move to recess the work session and enter the closed session pursuant to NCGS 143-3.
Thank you, Alex.
318.11A6, to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer or employee, or prospective public officer or employee, or to hear or investigate a complaint, charge, or grievance by or against an individual public officer or employee.
Second.
Motion is second.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now we can